Invention of the Telephone by Michael Lakes. All rights reserved by Michael Lakes. 2018. Narrated by Frank Lane and Jason Hill. Chapter 1.
Invention of the Telephone. The electric telegraph of Morse was a wonderful invention. A still more wonderful method of sending messages was to be found. There is scarcely a boy or girl old enough to read this book who has not used the telephone time and again. So useful is the telephone that it would now be very difficult for the world to get along without it. Yet it was not invented until 1876. The inventor was Alexander Graham Bell. Birthplace and education. Alexander Graham Bell was born at Edinburgh, Scotland, in 1847. He was educated at the Royal High School of Edinburgh, and also attended the University of Edinburgh and the University of London. From boyhood he was taught at home by his father about sound and oral speech, and he also received training in music. When he was more than 60 years old, he wrote the following account of his early experiences. Note: Dr. Bell was not only kind enough to permit the story of his life and of his invention to be told here in his own words, but he has read and revised the description. As I look back and see what points in my early life had an influence on this result, I think that one important element was my love of music. I could play the piano before I could read or write. I could play anything by ear. In fact, as a little chap, I was considered quite a musical prodigy by a distinguished Italian teacher, who, when I was about 9 or 10 years of age, took me under his charge to make a musician of me, but he did not succeed. Anyway, I had this love of music. I could play all sorts of musical instruments in a sort of a way. I also knew how the different musical instruments were made. I was just as familiar with beating reeds and free reeds, and the way in which the sounds were produced, as a person could be who had really studied the subject. A second element was of even greater importance. I came of a family that had made a study of oral speech for 2 generations before me. My grandfather, Alexander Bell, a distinguished teacher of elocution in London, was the first. Both of his sons, my father, Alexander Melville Bell, and my uncle, David Charles Bell, took up the same work. They also devoted their attention to the correction of defects of speech. People who lisped, or stammered, or did anything of that sort, came to my father to be taught, for example, how to place the organs of speech in forming sounds. In my early boyish days I had the destructive faculty very fully developed. My toys never remained whole in my hands. I would always pull them to pieces to see how they were made, and one of my earliest studies in that respect was plants. I had a delight.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?